Hey, spooky friends, and welcome to The Three Twisted Sisters, hosted by Britt.
Kay.
And Lexi.
And on today's episode, we will be discussing witch trials. Ooh!
Yikes a doodle.
Yes, witch trials.
Witch trials.
Haha.
Which kind? Yikes a doodle.
Quite a few. Actually, quite a few.
Oh, yes. We're gearing up for Halloween. It's just around the corner, so we figured we'd sprinkle in some historic, terrible things that happen to women and men alike.
Yeah. And if you're watching this on our YouTube, Three Twisted Sisters podcast, you will see that we are currently dressed up like some American colonial women.
And I gotta say, I like the look.
You like the bonnets?
You might see me walking down the street in this little cute outfit. I don't know.
Bringing this look back. I will say, you will not see me in this little outfit.
Don't knock it till you try it. What if it works?
Yeah.
It works for what?
Like the weather, I don't know.
What if it works? It kind
Hey,
of
I mean, like when you
light.
pull it down, it blocks the sun.
It's like a
from your
nice little
eyes.
hat.
don't
It
think
doesn't
it's
mess up my hair. It keeps it cute.
I don't
What
think
if
it's
like
supposed to
winter
go down
time, a
much.
cute little beanie? Like, come on.
Yikes.
No.
It's a conversation starter.
That's for
There
sure.
you go. You know what? There you go. That's it.
Yes, so this week we're wrapping up October. How has your guys' final week of October been so far?
Honestly, terrible.
Why?
Well, we had a crazy eclipse happen, so
Yes.
shedding new light in the darkness.
Mainly because of my allergies, though.
Oh,
I've been like clogged up. I went through 3 tissue boxes, and my nose is all dry, and it hurts.
you know, when I went to the doctor over the summer when I visited, they said that Texas is known for like one of the worst places to live for allergies.
It's
was like-
terrible.
Well, it doesn't help that like this area specifically, there's so many trees, and then there's a lot of construction. There's like a lot of trees that are being torn down. Not a lot, but there's a good amount. And then there's construction everywhere. And there's like a whole freak out on our neighborhood Facebook page about them not having water trucks, and because they really did. They kicked up so much dust.
Oh, so much dust.
Like everyone, like dirt and everything. Everyone's cars were like
Gross.
brown.
And like I had just washed mine too, and it was like brown. And it's not a brown car; it's a blue car.
Yeah, and this is like a week and a half of everyone's like houses and cars being like covered in like dirt. But anyway, so it doesn't help the allergies. Get me like sidetracked on some
Tell me about them allergies.
issues.
Yeah.
Allergies suck.
Yeah, but
Well, I had a birthday this week.
Woo! Yes, you did.
Mhm.
Yep. Turned the big 3-1.
I almost said 3-0. Big 3-1, 31 and thriving.
Yes.
Here we go.
How does it feel?
I feel
Compared
a little
to
older.
like 18? Like, how does
Yeah, oh jeez.
Just kidding.
Honestly, like I've said it before, but 30s are kind of I like them a lot so far.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from a lot of females, actually.
Mm-hmm.
30s
And
are
quite the opposite for dudes.
Really?
Yeah.
The one thing I will complain about is the gray hairs.
I think I have some going in.
I mean, I had my first one when I was 21. I remember it was like a month after I got married, and I was like, what the f-? And I freaked out. But yeah, It's just, it's
It's
fine.
okay. A little
It's
salt
fine.
and pepper didn't hurt though.
Amen. I say keep them all natural, baby.
Okay,
Sweet
you both
rose,
are
sweet
blonde,
period.
so shut up.
My roots are fully showing, so
Yeah. And I can tell the difference because I've had a couple grays too. And I can
Mhm.
tell the difference between the gray and the blonde. It's like, oh my gosh, that is like silver. And that's in my roots, and my roots are overgrown right now. So it's you
Yes.
can tell pretty bad.
Yeah. I'm like, okay, I just need a little root touch up and I'm good to go.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, the 30s getting into your 30s is not as scary as I thought it was. That's for sure.
That's good to know. I'm right
Mhm.
there.
You are. You are. Come on down the mountain, Missy. I feel like Betsy Ross or some shit in this.
Yeah. Is it easy to move? Because you look a little restricted.
It is pretty easy. I have
She wants to
shoulder
keep
pads.
Oh yes.
That's
She
so
must
graceful. So
I have these shoulder pads. I don't want to make them all crooked.
I like them.
Thank you. Anywho, let's go ahead and get into the topic of today's episode.
Yes, let's. I'm excited.
Yes. So we're talking about now mine honestly, like there's a couple points where I'll say like deep breath because it's a little overwhelming and kind of heavy, but I think it just comes with the territory of this topic specifically. So yeah, let's start it on up. Alrighty, so with my notes, I'm mainly covering the Scottish witch trials, but I've sprinkled in some of like historical, brief history, if you will. So yes, let's get on into it. Yeah. So a brief history of witch hunts / witch trials in early modern Europe. So we're talking like the 1400s all the way until like the late 1700s, 1780s ish. Okay. So in BCE times, fortune telling, witchcraft, any sort of mystical doings were pretty much a no go. They were considered evil and of the devil. So actually in 1317 in France, Pope John the 12th had several assassination attempts and hits out against him, one being a fellow bishop who was actually executed for using witchcraft against the Pope. So that was kind of crazy. I was like, wow. So fast forward a little bit of time to 1563 in Scotland. So King James VI, he actually believed wholeheartedly that he was, quote, the devil's greatest enemy. Like, the ego on this man, out of everybody in the world, I am. Like, sir.
It kind of fits. He's a king.
Yeah.
It's like
Still,
king
like,
mentality.
Also, fun fact, the King James version of the Bible was created during his time ruling. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I was like, huh, okay, sir, chill.
Right.
But so the big thing with him was I just caught my hat. The big thing with this bonnet.
It's like, I don't even know what you look. I mean, obviously, I know what we're going for,
Like a
but
pilgrim?
you look so funny.
I know, it's so weird.
I like it.
You know,
I
like
feel
the lid on like a ketchup bottle, like an old school one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what they look like.
Is that what
They
it was, or is it the?
Or like a
It's the ketchup.
Yeah. That too.
I kind of really
feel
like it.
Was it ketchup bottles that had that top? You know what I'm talking about?
What? Who?
Was it ketchup bottles that had that like white top?
Yes,
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Not just like the little lid on the glass bottles, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that what used to be on the top of the bottle Now, how?
It's because they realized they were using it wrong.
Yeah, they were like, wait a minute, gravity.
As kids, did you guys ever pull those apart so that they were like bigger?
The cups?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But did you know that you were supposed to do that? So you had a plate of ketchup?
See, me and a plate of ketchup, like, no.
It would not work.
But a bowl.
Right. Yeah.
But
But like for fun as a kid, I'd like pull them apart, you know? But then somewhat, well, I don't know if they actually were. It's a TikTok thing or like
So it was
Instagram
right.
or something. Yeah. So it's 100% factual. But yeah, it's like they were like pulling it apart to like make it a.
It kind of makes sense. You
plate.
throw your fries on there too, but
That's too
yeah.
much. That's too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But
sorry,
it's
we
like a
got
one-time use. That's okay. So pretty much like the first inklings of witch trials in general happened because he accused a group of men and women of working with the devil to conjure up rough seas to potentially kill him during his returning trip from Denmark. Now, the whole reason he was in Denmark at the time was to wed his wife, the Danish princess named Anne. Now, what was wild about this sea journey is that they actually had to spend a couple of weeks in Norway. Sorry, did you hear this thing? Had to spend a couple of weeks in Norway because the storms and the sea was so bad. Now, under extreme mental and physical torture, the accused admitted and named 5 other people. So the list just kept getting bigger and bigger for meeting with the devil on Halloween night and conspiring this whole plan and coming up with this whole plan. Now, what's interesting, I will say, about King James is that he actually wrote a book or a pamphlet that was actually called Demonology. And it's chock full of, quote, ancient black magic rituals and witches, all sorts of sorcery, even mystical beings like werewolves and vampires. And another thing, this particular pamphlet or book was said to be Shakespeare's inspiration for Macbeth, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I have heard that before.
Oh, you
That's
have?
weird though. I didn't know like that King James was so
twisted.
Prolific.
Yeah, like theological. Maybe not prolific, but like I didn't know. I mean, I knew that all of the kings were very like my religion or nothing type of thing. But well, besides before when they were Catholics and they listened to the Pope. But anyways, I didn't know that he was so like spiritual. And that's weird, like writing a book about all of the like supernatural stuff.
But he also had like curated and influenced a Bible that is still used today.
Yeah,
which I think
that's what I'm like. How can you? I don't know.
Influential.
Maybe that's
influential. This man.
Power.
No, it's hereditary.
Yeah, maybe he like, was more like more one with himself.
Maybe.
He sounds like a paranoid, egotistical dude to me. I'm like, you need to chill, because it turns out in 1563, Scotland passed the Scotland Witch Act.
Which is...
Well, hold on right there for a second. Don't forget that. I'll bring that back up. So back to the King James and his newly wed wife's journey. So many more were accused, were tortured, and eventually hung, then burned at the stake. 26 women and 6 men were charged. Several more executed, while some actually escaped, only to be accused again in 1590, with a total of 70 convicted and executed witches. all because of this one rough, sea trek. Like, now, in the beginning of 1563, Scotland was rocked already with a Middle Ages style paranoia of witchcraft and sorcery. So, like I said, the Scottish Parliament actually passed the Witchcraft Act, where any form or suspicion of witchcraft or even consulting with a witch was a capital offense. Now, for nearly 200 years, 4,000 to 6,000 people were accused and tried, and more than 2,500 of them were executed. Fun fact, 75% of the accused were, drumroll please, women. Women. So for the time, and really across the board brief history of what would consider you to be guilty of witchcraft and sorcery. Credible magical practices included healing, love spells, finding lost or stolen items, using protection charms or charms for good luck, like I'm out, amethyst, like, blamed for another's illness, misfortune, or death. Like, whatever, people. And also basically using any object or words in a ritualistic way. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting how even though we don't like persecute witchcraft or witches in today's society, how much of like a negative stigma came about, like term witch and witchcraft and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Still
I know.
today, hundreds of years later.
And it's like, I mean, I didn't even get into like into paganism or anything like that, because I mean that was a whole other side to really witch hunts.
Yeah.
But this is more of like the trials,
Yeah, because when like the Christians started moving in on the pagans, dude, that was some wild shit.
Yeah, bloodbaths, literal, ugh, awful.
Yeah.
And the big one that really kind of signified and was the staple for you're a witch, was making a pact with the devil. Now, how would they know that? Yeah, how would they know that for sure? So there were typically two ways, if not by word of mouth, how they could potentially test a person accused. So one of the major things was looking for a specific or strange birthmark, which is, quote, the mark of the devil. We talked about that several episodes ago, about like the mark of the devil and familiars and things like that. Now the second one is something that really grinded my gears, and I brought a prop for it as well to kind of have that visual aid for everybody over on YouTube. So one of the second major ways to kind of say, yep, confirmed, they're a witch, they made a pact with the devil, is the ability to not bleed or feel pain. Now, yes, and at this,
true.
Huh?
Is that true?
Yes.
But it's like, but there's people that are born that way
and have like a higher pain threshold.
Yeah.
I know.
But not to be able to bleed?
Oh,
let me tell you, you guys are going to freak out.
Okay, go.
Okay, here we go. So the courts actually appointed what they called court-appointed people were witch prickers. So I told you that it really started and kicked off in 1563. Well, witch prickers were around until 1662. And now the crazy thing about these court-appointed people was that many of these pricks, like they're pricks, were actually fake and completely bogus. Literally, they were charlatans. And what that means is they would literally put on a show. It was just completely fake, phony, all of that. Because they literally would use retractable, and I brought the prop, which is, if you're listening on audio, it's just a prop knife for Halloween. It's retractable. They would literally use retractable pins or blades to show proof, quote unquote, that the accused was in fact a witch. And
Whoa.
like I said, yes.
That's crazy.
So they could be like, she is not bleeding. That is a terrible.
I hate it.
She's not bleeding. She cannot feel pain because they were faking it. You know, like, So let me set that down.
I was wondering what your prop was. I was like, oh my gosh, what does she have?
Surprise!
Jeez.
So luckily, around 1662, many of these phony witch prickers were denounced, arrested as frauds, and taken care of. Like, hallelujah.
Now, is this after people were murdered because of it?
Absolutely.
Oh
Absolutely.
my gosh.
That's crazy.
So back to the punishment of witches. When you hear of a witch trial, people often associate the accused with either being hanged for the crime or burned at the stake. For Scotland, the bodies of executed witches were always burned. Always. For instance, in Forres, I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. In Juarez, Scotland, convicted witches were put into, deep breath, spike-lined barrels and tossed down Cluny Hill, which is, I've seen pictures, it's a very long and steep hill, ending the torturous death by setting the said barrel on fire, eliminating and killing the witch, essentially.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Sounds like a terrible way to go.
How many, like, at that point, I mean, did they put you in the barrel and then they drive the spikes in? Or were the spikes already in there and then
The spikes, honestly, that's a good question.
like how do they get them in there and then how many like punctures until you die, like the bump.
Just imagine rolling. Oh my gosh, like
Oh my god,
awful.
it's gotta be so terrible.
Yes. Awful.
You think
awful.
maybe you would die? No, I don't think instantly.
I don't know, it depends on where it punctures you.
Like
I
I
would
did
be
it on the
like-
leg first, like of course not right away, but
Yeah, but they're all over, so just imagine. Think of like almost like an Iron Maiden
Yeah.
type device, and instead of it closing in on you, you're literally being tossed around in it down a long steep hill. Now, present day, they actually have a memorial for all of the people that this happened to, which I thought was really nice. A nice touch. But going back to,
do they have all the names of them?
they have a lot of the names. Now, it depends, because I did read in two of the sources that a lot of the kind of like the nickname for witches back in the day, if they didn't like record their actual given name, they would be called like Janet or Jenny. It's just kind of like a term that they used. But kind of switching over to how they got the confessions of these said witches and their torture methods, because not many people were willing to say, oh, God bless it. You know what? I am a witch. Like, absolutely not. So medieval torture devices made a comeback for the Scots and witch trials alike. Like I said, nearly all the accused were tortured for confessions and information. And they were often, just imagine. Humanity was out the window with this at this time. Absolutely. So a few examples of the devices that they used. Deep breath, everyone. Because for this, when I was researching it and seeing the pictures of the actual devices, it made me so sick to my stomach. I definitely could have been a witch in a past life, or So this first one is called the penny winkle. Such a cute fucking name for such an evil device, but it essentially was an iron device used to crush individual fingers or hands. So I did read a story of a family who was accused of witchcraft, and they had used one of these devices on a little girl in front of her mother to get her to confess. So, like, how twisted.
To get the mom to confess?
Yes.
That's so messed up.
Absolutely.
Do you think she did it? Did she do it?
I would have lied and said I was a witch.
Oh yeah, she confessed to it and was executed for it.
Was the little girl executed or was she saved?
She was since her mom confessed and her father had already been pressed to death, which I'm going to cover that in a minute. Since she was so young, she was spared that way. But just awful. Like, let me set your innocent child in front of you and get you to confess to crimes that you probably, for the majority of people, did not commit. Like, awful.
It's horrible.
Now this one, it's kind of a difficult name. I'm gonna put my English spin on it and probably butcher it. Hi, how are you? So, how are ye? So, it's called Kashi laws. Okay, so these Kashi laws, I don't know how to say it. So these horrific devices would encase a person, the accused's limbs, and then when they would be heated, because they would heat the iron, it would obviously burn the victim inside to get them to confess. So that was just another one of their lovely devices. Another one, which this one, like, looking at pictures of this, and I'm sure that you'll insert a picture of it as well, Kayla. It's just terrifying. So it's called the Scold's Bridle. And this particular one was not only used on witches, it was people who were accused of being gossips, things like that.
Whoa!
Right? It's like, XOXO gossip girl, oh no, you're going to be stuck with this iron muzzle on your face. So pretty much, there were some that I saw some pictures that were just basic. Essentially, it's like my word today, essentially. I'm sorry. It was an iron device for your head. Think like a muzzle, with iron spikes that would literally go in your mouth and hold your tongue down. Now, some of the more advanced devices would have additional ones to press up against your cheeks on the inside of your mouth, but they all had padlocks on the back of your head.
Oh my god.
So it's literally like you're stuck with this thing. And they had certain ones, like a couple that I saw were just super basic, like the tongue presser and the lock on the back of the head, but it goes like iron around your head.
Why?
Other ones I saw had the additional pokers for the inside of your mouth, the padlock around the head, but also had iron ears like a devil. And like some of them had like iron covers for your eyes. So just like the most monstrous.
And like
thing.
How would they keep them in that forever, or would that kill them?
Now, they would
No.
keep them in that until they confessed. Can
Oh
you
my
imagine, like, being in a cell with that thing on your head for who, like, you can't swallow properly, you can't speak, like, I can't even imagine. Just torture. Pure torture. And then the fourth one that I would like to mention, because it was used quite often, and I kind of mentioned it above a few moments ago, is pressing. Now, this is something that has been around for like thousands of years at this point, but pretty much the accused is placed down, laying down, and they place heavy stones on top of the accused bodies, one by one, until they were literally pressed to death or pressed into confessing. But can you imagine?
No.
Can you imagine? Now, I watched, and I've said this show like a million times. If you haven't seen it, it's really entertaining. I liked it a lot. Salem, they had one moment where a man was accused, of being a witch, and they showed, on the show that they were literally pressing him, and even like to like his final breath, like, you know, just laying stones on top of him until he was crushed to death, and you see like the blood, very graphic, like horrifying. So those were just a couple of the torture devices they used. They loved to forcibly remove fingernails,
Ew.
which I think is just like
Vile.
all of it is just horrific.
Yeah.
So like I said, there were thousands of stories that were extremely tragic and just very gruesome. Now I'm going to talk about the final witch who was convicted and executed in 1727. So now this started in 1563. So long time of witch trials and executions. Thousands of people have died at this point. So we're going to talk about Janet Horn. Now, I saw in a couple places she's named Janet Horn, but like I said, they used the name Janet or Jenny to kind of more or less just put a name tag on. Instead of being like witch or killer, it was Janet, Jenny, that kind of thing. So Janet Horn. She was tried and convicted of witchcraft after accusations from the neighbors were brought to light. They claimed to have seen her riding, quote, riding to the devil on her daughter's back after transforming her into a horse. So
that is quite the story.
This story, and I'm like, for why?
Yeah.
For why? So both her and her daughter were arrested. Thankfully, her daughter escaped. Like, thank the Lord. And it is noted in several sources. Now, I used mainly two, but several sources noted that the daughter actually had like either a deformity or an injury on one of her hands. So people are like, oh, look at her. She definitely has been transformed. Look at her hands. Like, it's just fucked up.
Aww.
Yeah. But thankfully, she escaped. Now, Janet, unfortunately, did not. So, like I said, Janet Horn was the last executed witch, and that was in 1727. Now, fast forward 9 years, by 1736, the Scottish Witchcraft Act was finally abolished, and instead, if someone was accused and convicted of quote unquote pretended witchery, they switched it from witchcraft to pretended witchery. The maximum penalty for the crime was a year imprisonment. So it's almost like they woke up and said, holy crap, we've been torturing thousands of people, you know, on this, on neighbors, on, you know, people's accusations of them. Like, it's just so vile, such a vile time. I did want to say, now I didn't go into researching her, but I thought it was kind of cool. If you watch the show Outlander,
Oh yeah.
if you watch the show Outlander, you can. Then you can, Nias. Guylis was actually a real person who time traveled. No, I'm just kidding.
Excuse me?
She was actually a real person who was tried, convicted, executed as a witch, which I was just like, wow, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But fast forward to modern times, this year actually, in June 2022, Natalie Dawn introduced the Witches of Scotland campaign to the Scottish Parliament to officially pardon all accused and convicted women and men of Scotland's 200-year witch hunt. This comes after the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, who issued a public and formal apology for the historic injustice to all who were accused and convicted. Now, not only was both those movements are so powerful and so important because they talk about the injustices and the like literal hatred of women, not to excuse the men who were also arrested, convicted, executed as well, but just the fact that the witch hunt, the witch trials, went after people who were a little different, who were a little odd, who were more oftentimes than not in poverty, like just targeted a certain level of people. And it was just truly a historical injustice of human life. So I thought that was really cool. No pardon has been officially released for the thousands of people who lost their lives to this sick cause. But I think, times are changing. We're getting better. There are lots, like I said, about Cluny Hill, if I'm saying that correctly. They do have monuments throughout Scotland for, either marking like this is the place that so and so was executed. This is the place that, they have like name placards and things like that for people who were victims. And I think that that's really important and special because more often than not, especially if you were one of these people where the witch prickers were literally like, oh yeah, she's a witch, like he's a witch, like golly.
That's horrible.
Yeah. That is the tragic and unfortunate Scottish witch trials.
Oof. That is so horrific. Honestly, I don't feel like we're going to come across any witch trial stories that aren't completely horrific, but that's insane, the length of time it went.
Oh, absolutely. And it's crazy. Like I when we first began brainstorming this topic, I was like, oh, I want to do Scotland, not only because when I looked into it, they had such horrific reported claims that I was like, okay, look, I want to do that one, but also because our family heritage is Scottish, a big portion of it is from Scotland. I was just, curious, but it's heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking.
It's awful. I mean, so the one that I want to talk about today is one of the most famous witch trials, at least in America, if not in a lot of places. I don't know. I'm American, so I don't know. But in America, it's the most famous witch trial to date. So, 1692, Salem, Massachusetts. It was a bad year for Salem, Massachusetts. Let me just start there. This is like, you've got to remember that the United States as a whole is huge. Massachusetts is pretty big. It's a good sized state, but Salem in general is tiny. And there's actually, at this time, there were two different areas in Massachusetts named Salem. So there was Salem City, and then there was Salem Village. So this one is talking about Salem Village, which is a much smaller community. It's not as bustling or whatever. And so this is their story. Now a lot of people already know it. Don't. Yeah. So a lot of people know Salem as America's most embarrassing witch trial ever, but a lot of really cool things happened, and I'll get into it. But I just want to start with 25 people died in these Salem witch trials. 25 lives are lost. Now, it's nothing compared to the 2000 or whatever that Brittany was talking about. But for such a small community and such a small span of time, 25 people died. 19 were hung, 5 died in custody, and 1 was also smushed by heavy stones. So that's insane. And there was over 150 accused. Freaking crazy. But let's get into the piece of shits that are responsible for the Salem witch trials. Yeah. So, a lot of you guys know a little bits and pieces about the story, and if you've seen The Crucible, you might think you know a lot about the Salem witch trials. But The Crucible is not incredibly historically accurate. And that's something that the writer prefaced at the very beginning of his script, was that it is not 100% historically accurate at all. But there is a lot of accuracy as far as names go and different situations in it. But I'm going to start with Brittany already talked about the process of identifying witches. So it's with suspicions or rumors. That's literally it. If someone suspects that you might be a witch, or that someone accuses you, then you were brought in as, you were charged with witchcraft, or you were imprisoned for it. So it all started with the Putnams and the Porters. So there were 2 very influential families in Salem at this time, and it was the Porters, who were more of the richy side of it, and then there was the Putnams, who were also still rich and very influential, but they hung around more with the poorer folk at that time. So that's kind of where this divide begins, was that they didn't really like each other because they didn't get along. Okay. Yeah. So, but they were very influential, and they were kind of in charge of the city. They weren't like, they were just very influential families in Salem at this time. So the Putnams bring in a new pastor, Samuel Parris, who I would like to say was a Harvard dropout, like Harvard dropout. He never finished his degree in theology. Okay. I just wanted to preface that real quick.
What is theology?
That's like the study of religion. So he was going to school for that, but he never finished it. And he was a businessman turned into a minister. Okay.
Oh, no.
So yeah. So I'm just saying, I'd be a little skeptical on your advice. Like, I understand religions believe that people like are come to God or whatever, and then they change. But this guy, obviously I have a skewed point of view, but fuck this guy, okay?
I felt the same way about King James. I'm like, all I read about you is you're egotistical. You think you're the enemy of the devil. Like, but now I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah, maybe we have a skewed point of view, but you know what? I don't care. Screw this guy. So the Putnams bring this new pastor into Salem Village, and with him, he brings his wife, his 3 children, a niece, 2 slaves who were originally from Barbados. So we've got John Indian and Tituba. So these two, Tituba. So these 2 slaves were brought with the Paris family, this new pastor family. Okay. So early on in Paris's tenure of being a minister, he is already kind of causing problems. He did not make a very good agreement when he chose to come to Salem. So he was asking for more money, he was causing arguments with people, and he was just kind of a douchebag. And this really created a big strife within the church. And a lot of the people didn't like his point of view with his preaching. So it divided the congregation, and the split was very visible. He would get, if someone like pissed him off in church, he would literally ask them to leave and never come back. It was very weird, right? And at this time, I mean, early America, when you think of, when you learn about how early America kind of handled gods, like the Puritans and stuff, where they have that idea that God is holding you, you're a spider over a pit of fire, and he's just waiting for you to piss him off and he's going to drop you in. So it already has like really strange, very controlling ideas in the religion of early America. A lot less love and a lot more scary and hatred. But this guy really bothered a lot of people in Salem. So it divided the church, which then divided Salem into pro and anti-Paris factions. Okay? Very interesting that this one person caused this huge divide. Yeah. Okay, so now let's start with the girls. So again, if you know a little bit about Salem witch trials or you've seen the Crucible, then you know that it all started really with these little fucking brats. Okay? They are just the worst of the worst. So let me just let you know who they are. It's Paris's daughter, the new pastor's daughter, Betty. She was 9 years old at the time. Okay. And then his niece that he brought along too, Abigail, who was 11, and their friend, Anne Putnam. Okay. And she was 12. So these
they
three
were so young.
Yeah. 9, 11, and 12-year-old girls. Okay. So they began indulging in fortune telling, which they learned with the voodoo tales that were told to them by Tituba, okay, the Paris's slave. So supposedly she told them about voodoo and taught them different things. So then they started fortune telling, which I don't know the details. That's just what it said, that's how it began. And in January of 1692, Betty and Abigail's increasingly strange behavior, which was basically just them being assholes, like juvenile delinquency, just straight up monsters, came into the picture, right? Okay, so they screamed, they made odd sounds, they threw things, they contorted their bodies, and they complained of feeling biting and pinching sensations all over their body. Okay, so this is January. So now I do want to say that some scholars have tried to debunk what happened during the Salem witch trials by saying, oh, well, the Salem townsfolk they must have been eating cereal or bread or some type of grain that was like from rye bread that when mixed with a certain chemical, when it grows, it acts like LSD. So they're like, oh, the whole town must have been tripping on LSD, basically, and that's where all of these crazy antics and these hallucinations came from. But scientists have been like, you're fucking wrong. So if you think that it was started from the rye bread thing, you're wrong. That's not it. And they were able to kind of debunk that because it wasn't happening all over this area. There was a small amount of people, well, children, that were the ones having these fits. So that's kind of where I'm like, well, the Crucible was kind of accurate in that because they never tried to say like, oh, all of these people were just crazy. No, like from drugs. No, they were crazy because they were freaking horrible monsters, okay?
Right.
So do not think that if you hear all these people like, well, the fungus that was growing in the rye bread. No. Actually, it's already been debunked. You're a little debunked. And these people were just straight up psychotic monsters, okay?
I mean, where can I pick up some of this rye bread? I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So
No, but seriously.
in February, so this was January, was when the fits started happening and the delinquent behavior, if you will, okay? But in February, they had taken them to all these different doctors to try to figure out what is wrong with our daughters. A fucking lot, let me just tell you. Well, I don't want to say that, because what a lot of psychologists and doctors believe is that they could have been acting out not because they were literally like dealing with the devil, but because of like child abuse or abuse. So these girls may have experienced something bad that made them in turn act like this, okay? That's a possibility. But in February, well, throughout January and into February, their parents were taking them to all these different doctors, trying to figure out what's wrong with them. So none of the doctors, or the local doctor, was unable to account for their behavior medically. So this doctor, William Griggs, put the blame on the supernatural. Okay, so this is where it starts getting more interesting. Okay, a little crazy. So Dr. Griggs is like, nope, it's not medical. It's got to be supernatural. So at the suggestion of a neighbor to the Paris family, they make a witch cake. Now, if you don't know what a witch cake is, I will gladly share. It's a cake baked with the urine of the victims. So all these little girls' urine is baked into a cake. And they do that to try to rid the victims of these supernatural entities that are possessing them or whatever, right? So Tituba is the one that decides to, yes, I'll take on the burden of making the cake, right? So it provided no answers whatsoever.
You don't say.
Yeah. But baking it in general outraged Paris. Okay? He was calling blasphemy and he was furious. So Betty, remember the 9-year-old, and Abigail, the 11-year-old, claimed to have been bewitched by Tituba, their own slave, like their family's slave, and 2 other random members of the community, which neither of those women that were accused with Tituba attended church recently. So they had been either kicked out of church or they refused to go because of Paris. So these 2 other women are Sarah Good, who was like a homeless person. She was a beggar, okay? And Sarah Osborne, an elderly, bedridden woman who was scorned for her romantic involvement with an indentured servant. So, a homeless person and an elderly woman confined to her bed and Tituba all supposedly bewitched these girls, okay? And that's why they were acting out. So, both Good and Osborne obviously were defending themselves and trying to protect their own innocence. And they were like, no, we're not witches. Although Sarah Good, being not so good, turned on the old lady and said, yeah, I'm not a witch, but she is. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's harsh.
Getting pretty intense. Yeah. So Tituba obviously was questioned too, and she claimed to be blameless. She was like, no, that's not me. But after being repeatedly badgered and most likely incredibly tortured for days, and she was also in fear of her vulnerability in society, being a slave right now. Okay, so she ends up telling the magistrates that she had been visited by the devil and made a deal with him. So in 3 days of her testimony took 3 days, okay? She describes encounters with Satan's animal familiars, and with a tall, dark man from Boston who had called upon her to sign the Devil's Book, in which she saw the names of Susan Good and Susan Osborne, along with 7 others that she could not read from where she was standing.
Really?
Uh-huh. Okay, so the plot thickens. So the magistrates had the confession of Tituba and another accusation on Osborne. Okay, so they're like, well, we're accepting what Tituba is saying as evidence. Okay, she saw the book. All right, she knows the familiars dragged her there. She knows this guy from Boston, so it's all legitimate. Okay, so they were accepting more accusations from the public of any other people because they need to find these 7 other people, supposedly, right? So complete hysteria is happening all over Salem at this time. And thankfully, other young girls and young women also began experiencing fits, among them Anne Putnam, who is the other friend of them, the 12-year-old, her mother, her cousin, this woman, Mary Walcott, and the Putnam's servant. So almost the entire Putnam family is now bewitched, right? They're all experiencing the same symptoms, okay? So they began identifying other witches, which no longer were just these outcasts to society, but rather upstanding members of their own community. But funny enough, these upstanding members were all friends of the Porters. They were either related to them or they were very close to the Porters, the other large family unit, the Putnams and the Porters. So no one thought that this was strange, that all of these Putnams are all of a sudden bewitched by people that are in connection with the Porters. And to top it all off, the main pastor involved was brought into Salem by the Putnams. Okay, so whatever. Yeah, that has nothing, there's no coincidence there.
Mm-hmm.
So the weeks pass, and many of the accused proved to be enemies of the Putnams. Okay, so that's just kind of there and said. But in May 27th, 1692, after weeks of informal hearings accompanied by all the prisoners, Sir William Phillips, who is the governor of Massachusetts Bay, interceded and ordered an official court to hear and decide in the Salem Tower of what they're going to do with all of these accused witches. Okay, so many in the community were all watching this unfold, and they were seeing all of these people in their community being accused, and they were silent, obviously from fear of them being accused, which really was just a downfall to all of the people who ended up dying or were imprisoned or died in custody, because if they would have overruled these disgusting people that are all entangled with the Putnams, they could have prevented all of this. But whatever. Most of them were silent throughout this entire thing. And on June 2nd, a woman, Bridget Bishop, who had already been accused and was found innocent of witchcraft 12 years prior to this, was then convicted as a witch. Okay, so she was accused and convicted, and she was hung or hanged. Hung or hanged? I don't know.
I think they're both.
Yeah, they hung her on June 10th. So just 8 days after being accused, she was then hanged. And the thing is that all of these different women that came forward that were pretending to be bewitched, they were in the courtroom writhing in pain, kicking and screaming and going like, she's biting me, they're pinching me, like Satan's demons are all over me, just outlandish stuff. So the court was completely, just overrun by the emotion that these bewitched people were acting like, right? So on July 19th, 5 more convicted people were hanged, and including Susan Good. So Miss Not So Good tried to throw Osborne under the bus, was then hung as well. Good responded to her conviction after they did this as saying that she was no more a witch than that judge was a wizard. And I guess that just pissed them off. Okay, then we've got George Burroughs, who had lived in Salem for roughly 3 years, and he was a minister in another area of Massachusetts before he came to Salem. Okay, so he was then convicted. Now he stood up in front of the court and perfectly recited the Lord's Prayer, which, I mean, there, from what the readings say, is that it erupted in the courtroom. That was when the community decided to be like, they're wrong. Like, this is wrong. Look at him. He just did it. He shouldn't be murdered, right? Like, or he shouldn't be sentenced. And there was an uproar, and they didn't listen. So,
oh my gosh,
George was also convicted along with 4 others, and they were all hung or hanged on August 19th. So that's really freaked everyone out. I mean, even more than they already were, but it was pretty intense. So that guy gone, unfortunately. And then on September 22nd, 8 more convicted persons were hanged, including a woman named Martha Corey, whose husband, Giles, was accused of witchcraft as well. He refused to enter any plea. He refused and denounced that he was a witch at all, which then he was subjected to strong, hard punishment and was pressed beneath heavy stones for 2 days until he died.
Oh my gosh.
So that's the one death from the Salem witch trial that was pressed under stones. And then we've got lovely Increase Mather. So this guy was an influential minister, and he was the president of Harvard at the time. So he was a very disgusting, torturous man, as were his family members and friends. I mean, they all were just absolutely disgusting. But I thought it was interesting that he honestly didn't really care about any evidence at all. If you were accusing someone, if you were accused at all, you were guilty. And this is a quote of his. "The devil never assists men to do supernatural things undesired. When therefore such like things shall be testified against the accused party, not by specters, which are devils in the shape of persons either living or dead, but by real men and women who may be credited, it is proof enough that such a one has that conversation and correspondence with the devil, as that he or she, whoever be, ought to be exterminated from among men."
Wow.
That's intense.
Yeah, this notwithstanding, I will add, it were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
They
So
probably killed so many that weren't even witches.
Oh, for sure. He was so demented. Demented.
Yeah. It was insane. But on October 29th, accusations were continuing to happen, and a wife of one of these men of Phillips that I talked about earlier was then accused. So once this happened, Governor Phillips ordered a halt to all of the proceedings of the court of hearing and testifying, strength and whatever.
Convenient.
So they then established a superior court of judicature, which was instructed not to admit spectral evidence. So they need hard proof now. He's like, you want to accuse my wife? You better have hard proof, right? Okay, so the trials resumed in January and February, but of the 56 persons that were indicted, only 3 were convicted. And they, along with everyone else held in custody, had been pardoned by Phillips in May of 1693. And as the trials came to an end, 19 persons, like I said, had been hung, and 5 other had died in custody, and Giles was smushed under the rocks. So,
Smushed.
I know. Yeah, that's horrible. So I think this is very interesting, though. In the years to come, there would be individual and institutional acts of repentance by many of the involved in the trial. So all of these people that were involved in the trial, that were executioners, that were supposed to be judge and juries, they all were starting to feel immense guilt because they knew that none of them were witches. Okay, so pretty intense. But in January of 1697, Samuel Sewall, who was one of the judges, publicly acknowledged his own error and guilt in the proceedings. And 1702, the general court accuser declared that the trials had been completely unlawful.
Wow.
Yeah. In 1706, Anne motherfucking Putnam apologized for her role as an accuser. 22 of the 33 individuals who had been convicted were exonerated in 1711 by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they were also paid £600 to the families for the inconvenience. Yeah. And then in 1957, the state of Massachusetts formally apologized for the trials, but it was not until 2001 that the last 11 of the convicted were fully exonerated.
Wow.
So it's really insane, but the positive spin on it, the silver lining, if you will, is that the abuses from the Salem witch trials and the disgusting, despicable display of law and order in Salem during the witch trials contributed to changes in U.S. court proceedings. And this is now why we have the right to legal representation and the right to cross-examine one's accuser and the presumption of innocent until proven guilty.
Wow.
That's plus.
Yeah.
Hey, that's pretty cool that they were exonerated so quickly. Scotland.
I know.
Up.
They still haven't.
No. So what were like the tests and stuff that they did? Because I know I didn't talk about it because I didn't see a lot of these sort of like tests happening in Scotland, but like the water test, did they do that? Do you want to talk about that a little?
Take it over. Go ahead.
Where they the thought at the time was, I mean, and still to this day, that water is like pure and it's like godly and it's supposed to, yes, thank you. So the thought that they had was if they were to dunk a suspected witch or literally put them in a barrel and like dunk them over repeatedly in the water, that they would either confess to their crimes or they would be able to swim or breathe through and live through that process, then in turn being like, oh, the water is rejecting you, therefore you are a witch. And it's like, oh, if they drowned, then, oh, well, I guess they really were innocent all along.
Yeah. The idea of what happened in Salem was that they didn't want any evidence at all. They were like, they're accused, this hat is so huge. They're accusing you, these girls are freaking out, that's enough evidence for me, and they were just going with it.
They're just like, you're done.
Yeah, they allowed the prisoners to admit it, yet hardly any of them did. But the real turning point in the Salem witch trials was when they actually accused the governor's wife. That was the end of it. And I think it probably still would have gone on much longer if such a prominent person wasn't accused. Or if they had even just stuck with like common folk, like very, very like outcasts. Like if they had continued sticking with people that were not society's most good people to look at or whatever, then it probably would have gone on a lot longer too.
Yikes.
The fact that they were cherry picking over people that they didn't like from their family, that raised suspicions.
And is sick in itself. Like you can't, cherry picking is a good, I like that term.
Thank you.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. But it is very cool that in the U.S., at least, they've all been exonerated, and no, they were not witches. And it's one of the most horrific court hearings in America to this day, and it was able to change so much that we still have change today. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, how huge is that?
Yeah.
Imagine, like, if you did go to time travel and you went to that time and you were accused of something and they were like, okay, we're going to chop off your hand. And you're so used to being like, but I didn't do it. Don't matter. Yeah, crazy. But that is the Salem witch trials for you.
Wow.
The legitimate one, not the crucible version.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool. Okay, so my witch trials are based out of Germany, and in the years 1400 to 1800 in Europe, there was suspected to be about 80,000 like victims murdered who were thought to be witches.
80,000?
Yeah, but from 1400 to 1800. So like it was like a span, right? And
really
they
buried
were
the lead there.
yeah, they were deemed the ones to like be either doing work for the devil or like communicating with the devil. And in 1486, there was a book that two German wrote together. It was Malleus Maleficarum. Like I said that wrong.
Sounded good.
Thank you.
did.
Thank you. But it was
Speaking of witchcraft.
It was like a 3-part book. So it was the intentions of the witch, the help of the devil, and the permission of God. So basically it was what the witches like do and the harm they're going to put, and then how to get rid of them. So it was like a guide to like what they're doing and how to terminate them, essentially.
Oh my gosh.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And that came out in 1486?
Yeah, 1486.
Ugh.
And that's what they used to really like dive into their like hunting.
Oh.
Yikes.
Okay, so the trial I'm going to speak of is the Würzburg trial, which was one of like the worst German witch trials in the modern age because it killed the most people, essentially. And it was between the years 1626 and 1631 was like the time for it to be happening. And the main like instigator of that was the Bishop Philip Adolf von Erzenberg. Say that right? And during
Sounds right.
and during his 8
Sounds
years, during his 8 years, which he like led, he killed up to 900 people.
8 in 8 years?
Yeah. And he killed 19 Catholic priests. It's like, that's intense.
Holy.
He killed his own nephew.
Oh my god.
And 1,400 children. 400 children, sorry. 400.
400?
Yeah.
And what was, like, how? How did he figure that they were witches?
Through the guide that they used.
Oh my gosh.
Like
wow.
the book that was like they're like
what the hell is this book got in it?
It like got so bad that like people just started like saying like, oh, my neighbor's for sure like a witch, because they were like scared to be prosecuted. And like you would find like doctors and stuff like watching the trials because they didn't want to be considered a witch.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Why do they always do that? Why do they always start blaming each other instead of rising up? Listen to my American ass.
I know.
Revolt.
Why would you ever point
Yeah. And then
someone to death, like,
right?
Yeah.
Like, who are you?
Yeah.
And then the bishop, he wrote like a book saying that he believed, or a letter, sorry, he wrote a letter saying that he believed about a third of the population was involved with like the devil, and that this book had all the names of the people on it. So like he believed it was about 8,000 people's names on this book that he was so determined to find so that he could like murder all of them.
Oh my god.
Because it supposedly had the people who worked with the devil in there, the witches. Yeah, pretty intense. Pretty intense.
That's disgusting. How did it end?
So he died.
Oh.
in 1931.
My
Yeah.
God.
He died, and then the king of Sweden, Adolphus, I think I said that wrong or right, I don't know. He took over in the same year, and it still kind of continued. But then there was this German priest who was also a poet and a professor. His name was Jesuit Frederick, and he was the one who spoke out and was like, no, these people that are confessing are the ones who are just saying it so that they can like get out of the torture. Like they're just saying it to like end it. And he was the one that like the persecutors like looked at for answers. So he was like, I'm seeing innocent people just say that they're witches because they just want to get it over with and like just die.
Oh my god.
Oh,
And that's how it ended.
oh
That
my
is
gosh.
freaking horrible.
Well, thank goodness for that one man. What was his name again?
Jesuit Frederick, something like that.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick.
Yeah, but after 400 freaking years. And for the majority of those 400 years, they're going off of this book these two fuckwads from Germany wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Like detailing a guide. That to me sounds like a witch wrote the guide. I mean, how would they know what to put in there? Just like with King James the Sixth and his stupid demonology book. How do you know what to put in there?
How do you know?
Unless you're either a witch or you don't know.
Or
you're killing people.
You have your own witch.
Yeah.
Like secretly have your own witch to like help you get power.
Yeah.
And then she's like, kill all these other witches.
And the fact that he not only murdered children, but the fact that he killed, like, I can't remember the exact
almost
number
100 people
of priests.
a year.
Yeah, 19 priests. And his own nephew.
And his own nephew. And 200 kids.
No, 400.
400.
400.
And not to mention, like, you said 80,000 people in 400 years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Oh.
But that was in Europe, so not just Germany.
Oh, okay.
Oh. But still.
Oh, yeah.
Europe, what is good?
Yeah.
That's
Oh my
freaking
gosh.
insane. How
And that book
terrifying.
itself sounds so witchy.
I want to read
Yeah.
it. They have it on Amazon.
Oh
I
my
know. I
God.
kind of want to read it too, just to be like, what exactly was
How
their
does someone
playbook?
read this book and then start targeting children?
I have no idea.
That almost half of the people that he killed were children. Like, what does this book say in it?
Right?
Mhm.
Like,
But what I was going to say, or what I was thinking.
but I wonder if he killed
Freaking
children because, like, they're like, I'm going to kill your child if you don't confess you're a witch. And the witches were like, no, I'm not a witch. And then,
I don't know. Being a mom, I'd be like,
but if you're
shit,
an
kill
evil
me.
witch and don't care.
I think that I think it would be very rare for them to actually kill a real witch. That's what I think. And I've always thought that with the witch trials is that there's no way that any true witch would have been caught. Or it would have been very difficult, or they would have wanted to be
What if
caught.
it was like a baby witch?
No, even then, I feel like they would not get caught. I feel like the majority of the people that they killed were not.
Yeah. I know. And even like thinking of, I know I mentioned this in the beginning, the pagans when, now my history is not the greatest when it comes to this particular topic, but how the British Christians went crazy and would obliterate pagan communities and villages and all of that stuff, man, woman, child, just obliterate them if they didn't accept Christ and give up paganism. Maybe going off of your point, Kayla, maybe they kind of adapted and said, okay, let's be a little bit more hush hush. But even like like you were saying, the men who wrote that book, and King James. I mean, not to put slander on King James's name, like
What
not to
slander?
put slander, but wouldn't if you were conspiring with the devil and you come up with, you have your own writer make your own version of the Bible?
It's intense.
That little
Sounds a little fishy to me. But what do I know? I'm just an American.
yeah, right.
It was never my king. But no, it's horrible. But honestly, think of being in like that time period and being accused of a witch. How freaking terrifying would that have been?
Oh my gosh.
Like, I know we talk about Outlander a lot. I know we do. We love that show. But when the few times that she was accused of it, you can, it was so like, the anxiety was so stressful because obviously it's a show and it's meant to stress you out and stressful things happen. But to actually think about, people were coming out like, we don't have the best track record with some of our neighbors, and not for any fault of our own. Really? Don't
My
make me start
neighbors
naming
love
names.
me. Wave at them every day.
Yeah.
Oh.
Not all of our neighbors though, but imagine like if either of those two neighbors turned around and they were like,
the corner neighbor, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both corner neighbors.
Yeah. If either of them, like, we're not going to get into the nitty gritty of our drama, but if any of those neighbors would have just came up and been like, they're witches. Freaking imagine. Like,
I know.
Marvel having her little fingernails pulled out until you admit that you were a witch.
I would cry.
Yeah. I would lose my mind. I would become a witch
and
murder everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously.
I can't imagine that fear of like, because like it's not like they just knocked on your door and they were like, if you would come out to court. Like, they broke in your house, ripped you out, tortured your family, like
tortured you,
and threw you in a jail cell for something that wasn't even true.
And the fact
like now that's like political, that stuff still happens today and stuff like that, and that's terrifying. But the amount at that time where it was like you couldn't even speak the word witch because you'd be afraid of what could happen.
That, and like the incredibly staggering number of women who were accused. Like, my gosh. Yeah. It's terrifying. And at that point too, in that time in history, those hundreds of years, women did not have rights. Women weren't, there was a point where women weren't even allowed to speak in a courtroom. So could you imagine standing there and the whole room is just like, witch, and saying all like the most vile things to you, and you just have to stand there and take it and then be like, I can't even argue. I can't even stick up for myself. I can't prove my point. Like, that at that point is just so...
It's scary.
insane. And I don't know if I mentioned this, not only like the medieval style of torture to get answers, but they did all sorts of things that weren't physical, like mental torture. Sleep deprivation was huge. I'm sorry. It just like light bulb. I remembered. Sleep deprivation was huge. And that in of itself is a torture method that is psychological. So I can't even, at that point, when you've reached a certain level of torture and you literally cannot take it, at what point, we say like, oh, I could never point the finger. Like, who even?
At what point are you like, if you let me go, I know that I'm not a witch, but you think I am because Susan down the street is a witch and she's making you believe I am. Like that. But then look at like the nasty people from Salem living on with that guilt. Like, at that point, is it better to live with guilt, or is it better to just die and not be a piece of shit human being?
Yeah, exactly.
Especially some of those like the barrel down the hill.
That's so intense.
It's just so despicable.
I can't imagine it being a sudden death, you know?
No.
Because even if they stick you, like, I don't know.
Because like when you're stabbed
and pulled through,
yeah, it's when it comes back out that you start bleeding out. But I mean, it can still take, depending on how many punctures you have, up to a few minutes before you bleed out.
And I don't know, like,
oh my gosh.
I don't know the specifics. Lexi, you made a good point when you were like, did they stick them in before or after? Because if the stakes the stakes, if they themselves were like really long, how could you get the body in there? But if they're small and it's just like, and you're like getting riddled, ugh, and then burned alive.
Or if they're not all the way in, and then they put you inside, and then they push them in the rest of the way. Or the rolling of the barrel pushes them in the rest of the way.
Ew! Oh my god!
Like, who knows? I mean, I don't know. I'm remembering a past life when I was thrown down the hill in one of those barrels. Actually, that's exactly how it happens. But seriously, it's freaking despicable. Like, I like that Massachusetts came forward and like exonerated all of those innocent people, and that they all have published about how guilty the people that were involved in not just the accusing part of it, but the actual execution of all those people. Like, I like how they took that back and they apologized, and they have, you know,
remorse.
Tried to fix it as much as they could, because you can't really fix someone who wants to kill them. But the fact that Scotland still hasn't is wild. And I'm sure it's not the only country. I'm sure a lot of Europe hasn't. It's sad.
Very sad.
Sad.
Yeah.
It's ugh. And all those people who, like, even thinking back to like our lineage, for instance, I'm like, by the grace of God, our family, like ancestors, survived that. Like, how? Because so many of those 80,000 people's lives were just done. Like,
not only the witch trials happening, but just life in general at that point. Like, witch trials are like one thing you have to deal with. To think of like everyone listening to this podcast right now, everyone in this room with us, your ancestors are badass for even making it through everything that they've had to survive. Like, just so that you, like, now you can live and maybe continue the lineage. I don't know. But that's crazy.
It's nuts.
When people are like, I want to time travel, and I say that before, like, I want to time travel. Then you watch a show like Outlander, and you're like, maybe I don't.
I know, because it's not even in herself. Like, she herself was, she was like, had a medical background and is, spoiler, going back in time and using her medical background to heal people.
Save all these people.
And then they're like,
backfires.
And that girl, like, it could be somebody, like, you're vying for the same person. You're vying for the same guy. And then they're like, witch.
Well, that's like the take on the Crucible. So the Crucible, and parts of the things that he changed was not their names or the situations, but the ages of the girls.
Yes.
So made
Why
Winona
make
Ryder's
them
character? He made Winona Ryder's character in the movie The Crucible. I'm sorry if you're thinking about the play, but they made Abigail a teenager and having like a love interest with John, so that it made it more desirable to read and see the play. That was his reason.
Oh, because I was about to say, why do they always make them older?
Yeah, that was his reason. I feel like it would have been an even more successful play if you kept them the same age.
Were they the same age?
No, like kept them the age they actually were.
Oh, how old were they? For real?
at 9, 11, and 12.
Oh shit!
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot.
I mean, some of the girls in the Crucible are young like that, but most of them are like older.
They're like the
teenagers.
fall.
back
little
then, that
follower.
was considered
Yeah.
like middle age though,
Almost, yeah.
because like life, they were useless. What, like 20?
Yeah. But like that's like
35,
like
maybe.
that's like my son being like rolling all over the floor
True.
saying you're a witch
Jesus
and
Christ.
you're bewitching him with your voodoo ways.
That might be.
And like Tituba, this already a slave, and then trying to like make the best out of her situation by like hanging out with these girls and teaching them about stories from her home. Like nasty little girls.
Little bitches.
Nasty little
And I
girls.
wonder if the Paris girls ever released, like, you know, an apology for what they did.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably not. Fucking assholes. Yeah, but that is those are
In conclusion,
Well, thank you, Twisted listeners, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yes. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you have seen quite a few different costume changes. Just kidding, it's only 2. We thought it would be fun to go into this video as colonial dressed people and then partway through change into witches in support of all of our witches who died during all of these witch trials. So if you are watching this on YouTube, yeah, hi. If you're not, our YouTube is hi. Our YouTube is 3 Twisted Sisters podcast. We would love to hear your guys' take on any witch trials, any kind of spooky, scary stories you want us to talk about, or you want to tell us. Definitely let us know. We love hearing from you guys. You can comment below on our YouTube. You could go to our TikTok or Instagram _3 Twisted Sisters, or you can send us an email to 3 Twisted Sisters podcast @gmail.com. Let us know your fun, spooky stories. We want to hear them.
yes, and we hope you guys have a safe and wonderful weekend. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
And everybody, please, please take care and stay
Twisted.
twisted.
Bye.
Bye.